I'd like to call the December board meeting of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District to order. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Mr. Leslie.
Mark Finkel,
Here.
Ken DeWitt,
Here.
Albert Hayes,
Here.
Richard Bird,
Here.
John Callahan,
Here.
Robert Leslie here, Robert Fulton,
Here.
Tim Anicha,
Here.
John Hodgkin,
Here.
Stephanie Rizicki,
Here.
and on video feed, Jeffrey Rosenthal.
I'm here.
He's here.
Excellent. All accounted for.
In the roll call, you heard our new board member's name called. Richard Bird, we'd like to welcome him to the board, and I'd like to ask him to give a few words and tell us a little bit about himself.
I'm a resident of Racket Lake originally. Our family has a marina there, Bird's Marine. Been in the family since the 40s. And I was brought up there, went to high school in Indian Lake and went to college in Morrisville, SUNY Tech. I've been Racket Lake Fire Chief for about 12 years, Board of Education. Town of Long Lake, I've served as town justice and councilman, and I was president of the Adirondack North Country Association, ANCA. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Been a board member of that organization for about 20 years. And also past president of the Central Adirondack Association in Old Forge. And currently have a marine business in Old Forge, where I live with my wife Roxanne, and my son runs our marina in Racket Lake still. I guess that's about it.
That's a lot. Thank you. And welcome. Welcome to the board.
Richard, Dick, what do you prefer to be called?
Dick is fine.
Dick? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Jeffrey.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Nice meeting you.
And we finally have a representative on the board from the Black River area. We've been waiting for that for a while. Again, welcome. We have, I'd like a motion to accept the agenda. We have no need for a revised agenda, so I need a motion to accept.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We have a couple of guests with us today. Joe Sullivan from the I can't talk. And we also have, since we're here in Lake George, Dave Wick of the Lake George Park Commission, and he'd like to say a few words.
A one-page cheat sheet for you. Thank you, sir. In case you get bored with what I'm saying.
Thanks.
Covered those around, thank you. So thank you very much for having me here today. Welcome to Warren County. I've been here for about 30 years now, originally from down at East Greenbush, Rensselaer County.
Oh, thanks.
So John was kind enough to reach out to me, 2-3 weeks ago?
Gentlemen, can we get the guest closer to a mic,
Yeah, which one would you like?
please?
Actually, if you, maybe Dave, you just move to the opposite.
Right here.
Okay, will that help? Okay.
Is that better? Okay.
That's better.
All right, sorry about that.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. So John reached out, which was great, and said, hey, we're about the same size agency, we're pretty small. I think the Park Commission is the smallest New York State agency, which is kind of cool because we're a little below the radar on a lot of things, which is very helpful to us. We had a great, I think it was like a 2-hour lunch, and we just went through a lot of background in each organization. It was very helpful to me to learn about some of the challenges that you guys are facing, because in a lot of ways they're similar to what we're facing as a small agency. So this morning I just put together a very simple one-pager that you can kind of read at your leisure, but a little bit about the commission. The Park Commission was created back in 1961. Basically, it's kind of a shell organization to take a look at Lake George issues really related to recreation at the time. So they created a marine patrol, and looking historically, we now have 21 to 24 foot boats. These guys were riding back in 15 and 16 foot boats back in the day. And you don't want to be on Lake George in a 15 or 16 foot boat, but it's interesting to look back historically at that kind of stuff. Our patrol continues to this day, a very strong capacity. So we were created actually originally in environmental conservation law, but just as a commission, no relationship really to any other state agency. And in 1983 ballpark, there was a national study on stormwater management that started looking at stormwater runoff and impacts to lakes nationwide, called the NERP study, National Urban Runoff Study. And out of that were alarming results that showed that Lake George was more rapidly declining in water quality than anybody had predicted before. And with the commission as kind of the shell organization, a framework that was sitting there, the natural effort was to say the authority exists in Article 43 of the Conservation Law to actually create a full New York State agency out of this organization and give it powers and authorities to try to protect Lake George and its users. We have water quality programs and we have public safety programs. Those are the two primary efforts. And so in 1987, they created us as a full New York State agency. They kind of carved us out of DEC. We operate under environmental conservation law, but it says we're a body corporate in politics, which means we are not under DEC in any way, although they do have one representative on our 10-member board. So we have a 10-member board of directors. We have some of the same challenges on reappointments. 7 of our 10 are serving on expired terms, one of which is for 10 years now. But we're interacting with the governor's office and DEC, hopefully to get those slots filled at some point soon. So we do have not a huge budget, it's about a $2 million budget, and that allows for 10 staff and 13 Marine Patrol. And from my perspective, I get asked all the time, what makes Lake George so special? Why are you the only lake in New York State that has a state agency solely dedicated to it? And I say, that's a great question. The reason that we were designated back in the day is it is one of the cleanest, clearest, largest lakes in the world. And forethought was given by the state legislature to create a state agency solely dedicated to its protection. But in a lot of ways, we're not any different from Seneca Lake or Cayuga Lake or Chautauqua Lake that have very similar issues that we have right now. And I do a fair amount of presentations at the request of other organizations, and they always ask that same question. And I said, the only thing that created us was strong interest in our local senator, our assemblyman, and we had one driving force, who's a force of nature, Dr. Bartlett. He was actually Andy Cuomo's law professor way back in the day, and he took it on as his mission to create this agency. But it's nothing different that couldn't happen anywhere else in the state. And why I think it's important, and it's not just another layer of government and taxes, is that we do not receive any general fund dollars. All of our funding, or 95% of our funding, comes from boat and dock registration fees on Lake George. So it was written into conservation law that the users of Lake George will pay for the cost of the park commission. So that means if you have a boat on Lake George, depending on the size of the boat, you're going to pay anywhere from $40 to about $100 per year. And if you have a dock on Lake George, which is the waters of New York State, if you have the privilege of having a dock on Lake George, not many of us at our income level do, but if you do, you pay $50 a year. And then marinas and commercial interests pay a little bit more. So that generates about $1 million worth of income. And that offsets the cost of our operations and running the staff. So we think that's a sustainable model, because once you get it in place, for the people that are boating and living on Lake George, you're talking about $100 a year. That's not even a blip on the taxes that they're paying that are locally based. So we think it's a supportable model, but it's not our job to go export that model everywhere else. That's really kind of a legislative initiative. But we do think that it would seem to work for some of the issues that others are facing. So I put a short list of the different types of programs that we have on the bottom. I don't need to go through those. But what's interesting is we don't have a specific limitation. So as a threat might face Lake George, whether we had Asian clam that showed up in 2010, spiny water flea, another invasive species, showed up in 2012, there's nothing hindering us from going after that and doing the best that we can to address those issues, those threats. We have a wastewater treatment plant in the village of Lake George that has been failing for decades, and the mayor is taking the lead on that. And we get asked by the governor's office, is this a priority or is it not? So we can step into that fray and help out and try to secure some funding for that. So I think one of the great things about Article 43, that's called the Lake George Law, is its broad flexibility. The first article basically says it can do everything within its stated powers to protect and preserve Lake George and the safety of its users. So that's a broad mandate. We do have some very specific things that are in the law itself that we're supposed to do, that we're kind of required to do, which is stormwater management, stream corridor efforts. Wastewater, which we used to have 30 years ago when it was vacated by a judge for procedural reasons, and a few other things, but that's actually fairly narrow, but what we can do is fairly broad. And that's what we're kind of looking at now is whatever threats are facing Lake George, road salt is a big one. I spent 20 years at Warren County Soil and Water Conservation, and I wrote grants for a living to construction projects. I did a lot of work on road salt, so I was able to secure about $1 million through grants assisting the municipalities to get new equipment and help train their guys into putting different practices on the road. And if you read the local papers around here at all, you'll see that's showing up in the papers almost every day now. That's how these guys are transferring their practices to significantly reduce road salt. That's nowhere in ECL, but it gives us the ability to work with local municipalities and make that happen. So that's kind of a quick overview of what the commission is, and I'd be happy to take any questions. I'd like to also thank Rob. Leslie, Rob has been basically a game saver for us. We submitted our update to our stormwater regulations on July 27th of 2018 and went into a black hole. And we're not exactly sure why. Rob probably knows more than I do about it. But Rob was asked, based on the confidence given to him by the governor's office and his skills in doing such, to take what we had submitted and reformat it in a way that was more approvable by the Department of State and by DEC and APA. And he spent a huge amount of time doing it, just looking at the binders. I can't thank him enough for what he's done. An extremely competent job. And he's getting us off at 9 after a year and a half. So I have to say thank you so much for that. It was very helpful. We're hoping to wrap this up, fingers crossed, within the next month or so. That would be great. And that just allows us to release those regulations to the public. We've already done the pre-work. We've already met with every municipality, every chamber of commerce, every chicken dinner that's out there to talk about these ideas and formulate reasonable protections for Lake George to increase our stormwater regulations. And we have that support unanimously around the lake. And now it's just allowing us to release those, and Rob's been very helpful. So with that, that's kind of a quick summary of the Park Commission. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. But thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. Anybody have any questions? Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. It was great. Joe's not here. I think he had one to talk. Well, we'll move on.
He said he did not.
Okay. I need approval of the November 13th, 2019 regular board meeting minutes.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any additions or corrections? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. Report of the executive director, Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir, I can.
Thank you.
Very well.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, my report appears on page 12. Just a few other notable items I'll address. Number one, obviously, we are still dealing with the after effects of a very significant rain event on October 31st. I won't talk about the specifics of those and the lake levels. I'm not a hydrologist, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. We'll have the chief engineer, Mr. Fulton, in a much better position to address that. But I do want to address some of the efforts that we've taken to communicate with our stakeholders. Obviously, the water levels over the years have been a point of concern after events like this. Part of that was the development of a Q&A that we put up on social media and the website. I want to thank Mr. Fulton for working very diligently with me and our public relations team on that. That just helps us be a little more transparent as far as the rules that govern the reservoir's operation, why we need to do certain things, why we can't do other things. And I think that's been effective, and it's been well received, actually, from the public in better acquainting themselves with some of the rules that govern our operations. We've also worked very closely with the Safe Lake Initiative, a group of partners, a consortium of different stakeholders around Great Sacandaga Lake that are working on enhancing the environment of safety on that body of water, and others. John Hudson and I hosted that group for their fall meeting at SFO, and we had a good turnout there. Several things came out of that effort. One was a desire to better promote the Send It app, which is a initiative of the Henry D. Ross III Memorial Fund, obviously Sean Craig Memorial Fund and Henry D. Ross Memorial Fund, major contributors and very active organizations within that Safe Lake initiative. This app allows people real time to identify hazards, whether it's boating or over the winter time, whether you're snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, snowmobiling, ice fishing, things that are out there. It's a crowdsource-based app, and it's been very well received by the community, especially on and around Great Sacandaga Lake. So we've had a couple of opportunities with those partners to promote that. One was just this past weekend when we had an opportunity to go on the Channel 6 News very early Saturday morning for a live segment devoted to the lake generally, the mission of the regulating district, but then of course winter safety issues. We have another opportunity this Saturday on Channel 10. So again, it's just part of our effort, given the fact that the lake is higher than some people are used to seeing it for this time of year. We just want to go the extra mile in helping ourselves get out the word and helping our partners better get out the word, God bless, about safety and taking reasonable precautions with winter sports. I do want to note that another a concept that we have been talking about, especially with Mr. Hudson, and following up on our successful, the lightly attended open house at the Stillwater field office last summer, is an open house at the Sacandaga field office to both better acquaint, again, people with what we do in terms of what the reservoir actually is as a water management tool, as a flood protection tool, and then the snow surveys we take. So again, just inviting people in, have some hot chocolate, talk about maybe some safety issues with our partners at DEC and hopefully the New York State Snowmobiler Association. We've tentatively scheduled that for January 25th. So again, for folks that are up Saturday the 25th, we hope that they can join us at the Sacandaga field office as well. And with that, I'll take any questions that any members of the board might have.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I've heard some very positive things about the Q&A, so
Great.
people are looking at it.
That's good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Callahan? If not, we'll move on to contracts and action. First one, resolution to approve Fourth Amendment to contract C012012 with Kleinschmidt Associates. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That resolution for this contract is just for an extension of time on the contract to continue the work. There's no change in fee or scope of work at this point.
Oh, okay.
That's simple.
Just
Just an extension of time.
well, this doesn't cost us anything, so motion to approve.
Yeah, make that motion. I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Second, resolution to approve Sixth Amendment to contract C092007 with Gomez and Sullivan Engineers. Again,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is similar to the first amendment for the previous project. It is also just an extension of time. The work continues. The scope is not changing with this amendment, and we just extend the contract date so that we can complete the work.
okay, that's easy. A motion to extend.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
I'm out of meetings.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Staff and committee reports, General Counsel, Mr. Lester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this reporting period, I worked a little bit on the arrival with the new board member. Did my best to get the acknowledgements and oaths and whatnot set up for Mr. Bird. I worked, obviously, as Dave Wick indicated, with DEC and APA and Lake George Park Commission regarding the advancement of the Lake George Park Commission's stormwater management regs. Also worked with Mrs. Rizicki regarding the heavy-duty diesel fuel usage and best available retrofit technology reporting requirements. We got that out without spitting. And John and his staff helped figure out what diesel vehicles we have and what it is going to mean for us going forward. Basically, every year for the last several, the legislature has relaxed the reporting requirement and the compliance date for taking diesel trucks that predated 2007 off the road. We have 2 such trucks which are non-compliant with the new clean diesel fuel requirements and have not been retrofitted with the best available retrofit technology that would be needed in order for us to continue to use those trucks. We have sought a waiver of the requirement that they be taken off the road. That waiver would be good for 1 year. So within a year, we're going to need to either take them off the road or retrofit them. John?
You said these are 2007 vehicles?
No, it's what, a 1999 and a 2004 vehicle, both of which predate 2007, which is when these new requirements were first indicated. Every year since 2007, the requirement that they be taken off the road immediately has been relaxed by a year. This year they didn't give us the opportunity to continue to use them that they had in previous years. We're in the same boat as every other state agency that has trucks.
This is
Yeah,
just,
frankly, however, it's a testament to the district's mechanical people that we've got a 20-year-old vehicles operating on the road.
so this is just state, just New York State?
So the requirement includes vehicles operated by the state and also vehicles operated by a vendor on behalf of the state. So if we were, we've incorporated, I worked with Rob to incorporate in our contracts a provision that requires our vendor to report the same information to, I believe it's the DEC, Division of Air Resources. So our vendors have to do it as well. It's less likely that many of our vendors will have a non-compliant vehicle. There are many exceptions. A portable drill rig is exempt. The pickup truck to tow the portable drill rig there is not. The snowplow, I think, is exempt. DOT gets away with it. We don't.
How involved is it to retrofit them to
So
comply?
John and I talked about the retrofit. He had talked to somebody at DEC's Northville office.
Yeah, the maintenance department.
Maintenance department over there, that they were not thrilled with the retrofit that they had done. It was rather expensive, and the diesel engine was not constructed initially with the expectation that these new computer emission controls would be put on it, and therefore it didn't run as efficiently as it would without the controls. So the likelihood that we're going to seek the retrofit avenue is lesser than taking on responsibility of replacing those vehicles. There's great interplay going on. John would like 3. Tim doesn't want to pay for any, and we're going to have to come up with a plan. I think the useful life we came out at 20 years.
Correct.
So we can borrow money over a long period of time to make a new purchase. But that we'll have to figure out in the next year.
And you said we have 2 vehicles that,
We do. We have two vehicles that are not exempt. Certain vehicles like the new backhoe up in, what do you call it? The new tractor up in
Black River.
Stillwater. That is compliant. I think we have another vehicle that is non-compliant but is exempt.
so should we be looking, instead of being faced with replacing 2 or 3 vehicles at once, should we be looking at maybe replacing one, spacing them out? Or?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we've also renewed our membership on both the federal surplus property and the state surplus property lists in the hopes of identifying an appropriate previously loved but post 2007 dump truck or 2. As council mentioned, the competition's going to be stiff because everybody's sort of going through the same thing at once. But I would hold out hope that as we look out at these issues, we can find at least maybe for one of these replacements something from another state agency, state or federal, rather that we might be able to get our hands on. But we're just in the beginning stages of trying to look under every rock for one of those.
But in that vein, it's been an exciting month. Other than that, in my report, I indicated we had no FOIA requests. We did have one come in after the date I drafted the report before the board meeting. We've addressed that, and there have been no appeals. That is my report. If there's anything else that you guys want to know about?
That lawsuit.
No, there's been no new developments with regard to the notice of claim that was filed against the district on behalf of a lady who tripped leaving a dock next to a commercial establishment on the lake, Captain Naughty's. Our insurance carrier is, I believe at this point, completing a 50H hearing, which should reveal that the district has no liability,
Okay.
and therefore we're unlikely to be sued, but hasn't happened yet.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, does that complete your report?
Yes.
Any questions or comments? Thank you very much. Compliance Officer, Ms. Wazicki.
Thank you. My report can be found on page 22. I will just bring to your attention a couple of items. We are moving along with the credit card payment process. Staff at SFO that will be involved in accepting the credit cards have received an initial training. I'm working with Tim to develop a procedural process. And in order to maintain a credit card process, we have to do a payment industry credit card scan to show that any vulnerabilities exist. So I did take time to have that test done, and we are in compliance. So if and when we finally bring the credit card payment process to fruition, all credit card scanning will be done in a secure environment. Our MWBE third quarter reports are due on January 15th, and to date we have $16,896 and change as far as the spend goes. So far it's been a very good year for us, MWBE-wise. I believe we will reach our stated goals that was approved. And on pages 23 and 24, you will find the credit card or the contract status sheets there. Please take time to review those. I do include those in your board packet each month, as that is part of our public authority requirement. If you have any questions, if not, that concludes my report.
Any questions, comments?
Just, will that, the credit card, will that be done before the next round of payments for the, or you don't?
Well, the renewals will be going out January 2nd or 3rd, so while we're close, I think Tim could probably speak a little more on it, because I think we're hoping to bring something.
Yeah, I think we've been working, a good half dozen of us who are involved in various aspects of the process of accepting payment on ironing out a procedure and then codifying all that in a resolution, which we hope to bring to the board next month. And so that would be after the permit applications and invoices go out, but hopefully before people start to, pay. And so we hope that this service is available to them when they go to make payment in 2020.
So we're close.
Okay. I just want to make sure I pay it in Florida.
Any other questions or comments? Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Manzanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The CFO report starts on page 25. Let me start by thanking the board and everyone present for the flexibility this morning, allowing us to conduct a board meeting before the audit committee meeting. You see on page 25 that the district on November 30th had almost $6 million in its general fund balances between the two Hudson River area and Black River area. That's down about $275,000 from the same period last year. That's about a 4.4% reduction. Of the payments that I outlined a little bit later, to me the most noteworthy one is the last one. You may remember that the district entered into an agreement with the Environmental Facilities Corporation in November 2017 to finance construction projects at the Conklingville Dam. That work is ongoing. To date, we have drawn down a total of $734,000 of the $3.1 million that was that agreement. We have made 3 interest payments as part of that agreement, and on November 3rd made our very first principal payment on time, in full, and so we remain in good standing with all the people that are involved in that agreement. We are going to talk a bit more in the audit committee meeting about the district's audit for 2018-19, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the district's financial condition at this time.
Excellent. Any questions?
Nothing here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chief Engineer, Mr. Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report begins on page 50. For the month of November in the Hudson River area, our precipitation averaged between 39 and 50%, a historic average. And inflow to Great Sacandaga Lake through November 21st was 190% of average. At Indian Lake, it was 170% of average. And our release of water from Great Sacandaga Lake and Indian Lake was 166 and 245% of historic average, respectively.
Yikes.
We had to get rid of water, Jeffrey. In the Black River area, our precipitation through the 21st November was about 50% of average across all of the reservoirs. And at Stillwater Reservoir, we had about 125% of historic average inflow and 131% of our historic average discharge. Currently, Great Sacandaga Lake is about 11 feet over the offer settlement target elevation, and Indian Lake is about 1.5 feet above its target. Stillwater is about 9 feet above, and Six Lake and Old Forge are right spot on target for where we should be at this time of the year. So, the graphs that I've included at the end of my report, easily depict what I just described, but can show the increase from the runoff that Executive Director referenced that occurred at the beginning of November, and of course our response and effort to bring those reservoirs back down to their respective target elevations. That concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have a practical question, Rob. I'm not sure it's in your particular wheelhouse. Is the lake frozen now?
No, it's not.
Okay. And when it becomes frozen, will the effect of the water drop expose time comes around?
Well, I think that was part of John Callahan's effort more recently, and what he discussed about his interview on last Saturday. So there's always a risk, no matter
Yeah,
what.
there's always a risk. This is a greater risk, and just like boaters, many snowmobilers pay no attention to the risk. They see a frozen lake or a body of water, enter it. So
Right.
we're doing what we can.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as the dynamics of the ice shifting during the course of drawdown, the district has never kept any records on that. So I really don't have any personal knowledge either of how the dynamics changes and or relative to the height of the reservoir at the point which it freezes and draws down. So.
Thanks.
You're
Did I
welcome.
answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one of those things we can't predict, we don't know, but you have to be concerned about the safety of people that use the lake. And it just was something that came to mind.
Yeah, we hear a lot of talk about the ice ridges. And
Certainly.
Yeah.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to add to what the chief engineer said, as discussed a few minutes ago, that new app that is available from the Henry D. Ross III Memorial Fund, the Send It app, that is designed specifically. If you go on that app today, and by the way, if you go to Apple Store or an Android device and just search Send It HDR3, stands for Henry D. Ross III, it'll come right up, and you'll see that ice heaves, ridges, that sort of thing are the type of potential impediment that they identify. And the idea there is you have users of that lake or other lakes helping other users, that don't need to then discover in a very unpleasant way the same hazard that has already been discovered once. So it's something that's very much on our mind, and one of the reasons we've tried to step up our efforts to just work with partners like the Sacandaga Protection Committee, Sacandaga Lake Association, and the Safe Lake Initiative to help increase the level of awareness generally.
could it affect down the road things like the fishing tournament and that kind of stuff? I'm just curious.
John, yeah, I mean, it doesn't. It seems like the
And I've been asked
snowmobiling
that,
is the biggest concern.
Right, the only thing that usually affects the tournaments are
Lack of
ice conditions.
Yeah.
A lot of the buoys, when you go around the lake, they're, with the lake so high, the buoys are 200-300 feet out into the water, and they're gonna freeze out there. I know I take mine in, but a lot of them are way out there, so that's gonna be a hazard.
And I'm sure John will address this in his report, but we've had our folks actually out there trying to help in other ways as well.
Mr. Chairman, can I have one other point, if I could, add to my report? I believe it would be on page 59. There's a spreadsheet of Great Sacandaga Lake Reservoir. It's the elevation calculator that I use to establish releases. And in the center, you'll see the column that's labeled Hudson River below confluence. It's got quite a bit of highlighting in red on that center of that spreadsheet. Those red highlighted numbers actually reflect the days in which we were slightly over the allowable release and flow in the Hudson River, which is, I guess, a great indicator of our effort to get the reservoir down as quickly as possible.
Oh, I understand that.
So you can actually see, if you compare the numbers within the highlights to the allowables that are in the columns immediately to the right, that's it'll give you an indication of where we were running slightly over the allowable. But certainly, I guess the most important thing to note there is that that's a great reflection of the effort that we put in trying to bring the reservoir down as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Then our Chief Administrator, Mr. Hodgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report starts on page 80. Mr. Byrd, welcome to the team.
Thank you.
Access permit renewals for the Great Sacandaga Lake will be mailed first week of January. Staff from the Sacandaga Field Office and Conklinville Dam removed approximately 30 trees on the lower slope at the Conklinville Dam and started to create an access road at the toe of the earthen embankment for easier access and monitoring that they do there daily. The tree removal was a FERC requirement, and we took care of that. The staff from SFO, Sacandaga Field Office, went out on our skiff on the Great Sacandaga Lake last week on a nice warm day, no wind, and flagged numerous trees with reflective tape and buoys. These trees came down the Sacandaga River with a heavy rain event in the end of October. Some of the trees were 60-foot long with root balls attached, posing a threat to the snowmobilers once the lake freezes. In the spring, we plan on removing the trees once we have the workboat back in action. But everything's been tagged out there that we could find with reflective tape and stuff so the snowmobilers can see them at night. Staff at the Black River Field Office have been busy with snow plowing, and they're also installing new piping in the house, connecting it to our new septic system that we installed this past year. Staff in the Hudson River and Black River area will be starting their snow survey the first week of January and every 2 weeks thereafter. That's my report. I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody may have.
Were there a lot of docks and stuff torn loose in the rain?
We didn't find too many docks that were floating around, but there were numerous docks up on the islands and stuff like that. So
Okay.
we
Any
tried to
questions?
tag everything that we could that posed a hazard
Oh,
out
thank
there.
you.
But I'm sure we didn't get everything.
Hey, but we know with all these questions, I do want to point out, generally, we think the staff and everything did a great job with this situation. You know, it's easy to say, well, what about this? But for the most part, I think it's been just a wonderful effort on it. Any other board member questions or comments?
Just a comment. I see my favorite nemesis, Mr. Oakley and Migliacco, have had their permit restored.
Well, they sold their property where they had the encroachment. They have purchased new property on the lake, are applying for a permit for the new area.
And they've resolved the issues that resulted in their denial.
Yeah, is that a question or a statement, counsel?
That's a statement.
They have resolved.
Yes.
They paid the fine of $7,500 plus to the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Any other comments?
That's it.
Well, we need a motion for the next meeting at the Mayfield Field Office on January 14th.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Any comments? All in favor? Any opposed? A motion to adjourn the regular board meeting? So moved.
What was the date? January 14th?
Yes.
Thank you.
Richard made the motion.
Richard made the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion, that was the motion to adjourn, right?
That was the motion to adjourn.
We are